My son slammed a thin piece of paper on the table, the edges curling like it carried fire. It wasn't a letter, nor a bill from the outside world, it was a receipt, demanding rent for the room I had slept in for 30 years. His eyes were cold, his voice steady, "Sign it, or pack your bags." The paper trembled in my hand, though not from my age, but from rage. Tell me, why would my own blood turn my home into a prison? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where you're watching from right now. Morning light spilled through the blinds, dust swirling in the quiet air. The house should have felt like mine, every brick, every nail had been laid with my sweat, but lately, it echoed like borrowed space. The kettle whistled low, the smell of coffee filled the kitchen, and for a brief moment, I almost believed things were normal. Almost. Then I heard it. A laugh, short, mocking, drifting from the living room. My son-in-law, sprawled out in my armchair, legs crossed, one hand drumming against the wood. He leaned back as if he owned the place. "You should be grateful we let you stay here, old man." The word slid across the room like a blade. I didn't answer. I lifted my mug instead, fingers tightening around the warm ceramic until my knuckles turned pale. The coffee tasted bitter, but it wasn't the beans. It was the way he looked at me, the way he smirked when my daughter entered, as though he were showing her the power he held. She didn't defend me. She didn't even meet my eyes. Instead, she walked past us both and into the kitchen, as if his cruelty was nothing unusual, as if it were her silence that kept the walls upright. On the counter, the folded receipt from last night still lay waiting. Thin, ordinary paper, yet heavier than steel. I wanted to throw it in the fire, to erase the insult, but instead I left it there. It reminded me of the truth, this was no longer my home, it was my prison. I forced myself into routine. I watered the plants on the porch, though half had dried from neglect. I swept the steps where autumn leaves had gathered. I even fixed the squeak in the gate hinge. Small duties, fragments of dignity. But each time I turned back to the house, I saw him lounging in that armchair, remote in his hand, shoes on the table I built with my own hands. At lunch, the silence was worse than the words. He hummed tunelessly as he scrolled through his phone. My daughter placed a plate in front of him first, then one for herself, and last, for me. By the time I sat down, they were already eating. "Dad," she said, finally looking at me, but not with affection. With weariness. "Don't start anything today." "Start what?" My voice was calm, but beneath it trembled a storm. Her eyes flicked toward him. He smirked again. "You know what she means. Just, don't be difficult. Keep things smooth." Difficult. That's what I had become in my own house. A burden. A shadow. I looked at the receipt again when I went back to the kitchen. Its black ink glared at me, rent due. The amount was small, not what hurt me. It was the principle. 30 years of mortgage, every overtime shift, every night my late wife sat waiting for me to come home, and now a slip of paper reduced me to a tenant. That night, I tried to sleep, but the walls hummed with voices. Through the thin wood of my bedroom door, I heard them whispering. My son-in-law's voice low, confident. "He'll pay. He's too proud to leave." And my daughter's softer, hesitant. "But, it's his house." "Not anymore," he snapped. "As long as he stays, it's on our terms." Silence followed, heavy and cold. I rolled onto my side, staring at the moonlight pooling across the floorboards. My late wife's photograph sat on the dresser. I wanted to ask her what to do, but her smile in the frame only deepened the ache. Hours later, I rose and stepped into the living room. The armchair was empty now, the house asleep. But on the coffee table, under the faint glow of the lamp, the receipt lay flat, as if it had crept there on its own. The ink seemed darker in the night, sharper, like claws etched into the page. I reached for it, but stopped halfway. My hand trembled. The receipt wasn't just a demand for money. It was a declaration: you don't belong here. I folded it once, twice, tucked it into my pocket. I could feel its edges press against my leg, a reminder that humiliation can be carried like a stone. As I returned to my room, a floorboard creaked behind me. I froze, then glanced over my shoulder. Nothing, just the empty armchair, shadowed and waiting. But it felt warm, as if someone had just risen from it. And that night, lying awake, I realized, the house no longer belonged to me. It belonged to whispers, to shadows, and to a slip of paper that had the power to chain me or free me. The armchair sat empty, yet I could still feel his weight in it, as if even in his absence, he had already claimed what was mine. The next morning, the air was heavy before a word was spoken. My daughter stood by the kitchen counter, her arms folded, her eyes fixed on the floor. Her husband sat at the table, chewing loudly, the sound meant to taunt me. I poured coffee into my mug, letting the steam curl upward like smoke from a slow fire. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was softer than his, but it cut deeper. "Dad, you have to follow the rules here. Or you'll have to leave." The mug in my hand trembled, but I steadied it before they could see. Rules. In my own house. I looked at her, searching for the girl I once carried on my shoulders, the girl who clung to me when thunder frightened her. But now she wouldn't even meet my eyes. He leaned forward, smiling like a wolf. "It's simple. Pay what's due. Keep quiet. Or pack." I placed the mug down carefully, though every nerve in me screamed to shatter it against the table. "You're telling me to obey, in the house I built?" No one answered. Silence was its own verdict. The receipt in my pocket dug into my leg. I could feel the sharp edge, like a blade reminding me of my chains. I left the table without finishing my coffee. Outside, the morning was brisk, the air damp from last night's rain. I thought walking to the market might steady me, but even there, the whispers followed. Near the fruit stand, Mrs. Grant, an old neighbor, leaned close to her friend, but not so close I couldn't hear. "They say he's paying rent to his own son-in-law." Imagine that. Her friend gasped softly. "After all those years. Shameful." They both glanced at me, their eyes darting away when I caught them. I forced a polite nod, but inside, I burned. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was a currency, passed from mouth to mouth, cheaper than the fruit they were weighing. At the butcher's counter, another whisper: "Poor man. I heard he's nothing more than a tenant now." Each word was a stone piled onto my shoulders. My son-in-law hadn't just caged me in my home, he'd sent my dignity into the streets, to be butchered and sold like gossip. I hurried back, groceries in hand, my breath sharp in the cold air. The house loomed ahead, every window watching me like a jury. Inside, they were waiting. He leaned back in my chair again, tapping the table with his finger, a steady beat meant to unnerve me. My daughter stood beside him, her lips pressed tight, her face pale. "Did you hear me this morning?" she asked quietly. "I heard," I said. My voice didn't shake this time. "Then you know. If you can't follow our rules, Dad, maybe it's better if you left." Her words cracked on the last syllable, but she didn't take them back. My son-in-law grinned. "You heard her. It's decided." I looked between them. My own blood had given me an ultimatum. Obey, or leave. Slowly, I reached into my pocket. The folded receipt brushed my fingers like a reminder of the insult, the paper scar that had already marked me. I pulled it out, laid it flat on the table. The ink glared back at me. I didn't sign it. I didn't tear it. I simply pushed it back toward him. "You think this makes you the man of this house?" My voice was calm, cold. "You've mistaken paper for power. His smirk faltered, if only for a second. My daughter shifted uneasily, her arms tightening around herself. I turned away before they could see the storm in my eyes. I went to my room, shut the door softly, and leaned against it, chest heaving. The sound of their muffled voices bled through the wood, but I no longer cared. I unfolded the receipt again, stared at the amount written, then at the empty line where my signature should have been. The paper didn't just demand money, it demanded submission. I whispered to myself, so low even the walls wouldn't hear, if they think I'll bow, they've forgotten who built these walls. The words hung in the air, stronger than any contract, more binding than any ink. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't dream of escape or forgiveness. I dreamed of justice. And I knew the day would come when this slip of paper, this receipt of shame, would be turned against them, proof not of my weakness, but of their betrayal. And with that thought, I slipped the receipt back into my pocket, heavier now, not with debt, but with the weight of coming war. The day began with a soft rain and a hard silence. I could tell by the way the house breathed, slow, careful, that something on paper had already been decided for me. The kettle rattled on the stove, somewhere, a faucet dripped like a metronome counting down to a verdict I hadn't heard yet. He came in carrying a stack of envelopes like trophies. My son-in-law didn't sit this time, he stood, arranging the papers on the table with the care of a man laying out a map to buried gold. Utilities, he said, tapping the top envelope. And these. Another tap. Service fees. Your share. I stared at the pile. Familiar company names glared up, electric, water, internet, things I'd paid for decades without keeping receipts because love, back then, had been its own ledger. Now love was a balance sheet, and I was the red line. Since when do we charge family for sunlight and water? I asked. He smiled without warmth. Since expenses went up. Times are tough. My daughter hovered near the doorway, arms folded tight. It's only fair, Dad, she said, but her eyes flicked away as if fairness were a light too bright to stare into. I reached for the envelopes and slid a finger under the first flap. Inside, a printed form with my name typed wrong, 20 years in this town and they could still misspell it. The total was circled in thick, impatient pen. Beneath it, another note, due on receipt. I took a breath, steadying the tremor in my hands. I've already paid the mortgage for 30 years, I said. The roof you sleep under was poured out of my back. He shrugged. Mortgage is history. This is present. I set the envelope down before my fingers tore it. On the counter, yesterday's receipt lay folded where I'd left it, quiet, accusing. I slid it toward the stack and aligned the corners, like I was straightening a picture frame in a room that had already been looted. He produced another page. Internet. Premium package. You stream too, don't you? I read, I said. He laughed once. Reading won't keep you connected. I didn't rise to it. The kettle clicked off and the sudden silence was louder than his voice. I poured coffee into my mug, the steam fogging my glasses, the smell grounding me in a past they couldn't price. My daughter set a saucer in front of me, careful not to touch my hand. Her wedding band flashed like a small, closed door. He slid the last envelope across. We'll need cash. No checks. Why? Fees, he said, too quickly. I looked at my daughter. The hesitation in her throat was a bird trapped behind glass, I could almost hear the flutter. It's fine, Dad, she said softly, but the softness felt rehearsed. We'll keep track. I'm sure you will, I said. At the table, I opened my small ledger, the one I'd started after their receipt appeared, to record what they now claimed I owed. The paper's edge kissed my palm. I wrote the totals in neat lines, adding dates, noting names. Line by line, they tried to turn me from father to tenant, from keeper to kept. He watched me write. Good, he said. We're aligned. Aligned, I repeated, tasting the word like a bitter fruit. Is that what you call it when you lean on the man who built your floor? His jaw ticked, but he kept smiling. Let's not be dramatic. I took another sip, then set the cup down with the care I once used for my daughter's fever medicine. And if I don't pay? He didn't answer right away. He let the question hang between us, a wire stretched tight. Finally, he said, let's not test that, either. There it was, the second price, the one not written down, obedience. He left the envelopes and walked out humming, satisfied. My daughter lingered. For a moment, she pressed her lips together like she might speak, like she remembered bedtime stories and the big-cheeked apples I used to slice thin for her after school. But her husband called her name from the other room, and the memory went with her. When she was gone, I gathered the envelopes into a pile and took them to my room. I laid them on the bed beside my old wooden folder, the one with a brass clasp I hadn't touched in years. It used to hold school drawings, insurance summaries, my late wife's recipe card stained with cinnamon. Today it would hold something else, proof. I flattened each bill, smoothing the creases with the heel of my hand. I stapled the envelopes to the back of their pages so there'd be no talk of confusion later. Next, I pulled yesterday's rent receipt from my pocket and slid it beneath the utilities, like a rotten foundation under fresh paint. The brass clasp caught the light, faint, stubborn. I kept working, photocopies of the deed, my original mortgage statements, a faded photograph of me and my wife on the porch the day we paid it off. She was laughing, head thrown back, her hair in the wind. I placed that photo on top of the pile for exactly 12 seconds, long enough to feel its warmth, not long enough to deplete it, then returned it to the drawer with the care of a man banking a flame for later. From the hallway, the TV rose and fell like the tide of someone else's life. I heard my son-in-law laugh at a joke that wasn't funny. I heard my daughter set plates, the clink of ceramic, a language I used to speak. I pressed a pen to the ledger again and wrote, utilities, due. Cash requested. No reason given. Cash is clean, I murmured to the empty room. And clean things show dirt best. I tested the brass clasp. It clicked, then released. I opened the folder and added a crisp divider labeled payments. Another, demands. A third, deed and house. I underlined the last one twice until the ink bled into the paper like a quiet wound. When I returned to the kitchen, he was back in my chair, ankles crossed, smiling. So, we're good. We're documented, I said. He tilted his head. Same thing. Not in court. The smile thinned. He waved a hand, dismissing the word like a fly. No one's going to court, old man. Just pay on time. I held his stare for a long, level moment, then picked up my mug. The coffee had gone lukewarm. I drained it anyway. I've paid on time my whole life, I said. The question is, what have you earned? He didn't answer. My daughter returned with a dish towel, avoiding my eyes, her knuckles white around the cloth. For one heartbeat, the towel twisted in her hands like she was wringing water, or conscience, out of it. Then she let it fall flat across the oven handle, and the heartbeat was gone. I left them in the kitchen and went back to my room. I slid the folder into the bottom drawer and laid a spare shirt over it. Then I lifted the shirt again. No, this wasn't something to hide. This was something to show, when the time demanded it. I set the folder on the dresser instead, in plain sight beneath the quiet photograph of my wife. Rain thickened against the window. In the dim light of afternoon, the brass clasp glinted like an eye that did not blink. I reached for it once more, testing its mouth. The inside smelled faintly of old paper and stronger of new ink. They think paper makes power, I said, hearing my voice steady itself. They've forgotten paper makes proof. Evening came fast. We ate without speaking. He scrolled his phone. My daughter's fork barely touched her plate. A drop of gravy hung on the edge of the dish and fell, dark and slow, onto the table I sanded smooth in a different century. After I washed my cup, I dried my hands and went to my room. I stood before the dresser and the folder, listening to the house click and settle around me, the way a man shifts in a chair that isn't his. I lifted the cover. I placed the new envelopes in order. I pressed the brass down. The folder snapped shut, clean, final, the sound of a lock sliding home in a house that would soon remember who owned it. If you're still here, don't forget to subscribe, and comment your thoughts. It wasn't about money that night. It was about erasing me. Dinner steam fogged the window while the rain tapped a steady verdict on the glass. The house smelled of rosemary and something burnt. He'd taken over the oven, the timer, the music, he'd taken over time itself. My daughter set plates without looking at me. When I pulled my chair out, it scraped against the floorboards like a protest no one intended to hear. He reached across the table and shifted my plate 2 inches away from its usual place, away from the head of the table I'd carved and varnished by hand. It wasn't clumsiness. It was a ceremony. "You're just taking up space," he said, chewing. "Don't block the path." The words didn't land, they dissolved into me, and in their place, a colder thing remained. My hand went to my pocket, touched the folded receipt from days ago, creased now, the ink beginning to feather at the edges like bruises that refused to stay contained. I placed my napkin on my lap, slow, deliberate. "There's room," I said. He smiled without teeth. "Not for what you're trying to be." I kept my voice level. "And what is that?" He speared a piece of meat and didn't look at me. "Important." My daughter's fork paused midair, a drop of gravy fell and darkened the table. She stared at the stain like it might explain the rules better than either of us could. "Let's not," she murmured. "Let's," he said, settling back. "Let's be honest." He gestured vaguely, as if pointing to a frost on the air. "This house works now. It runs smooth. No clutter. No old stories." "Old stories built these walls," I said. He waved a hand. "History's a museum down the road. We live in the present." "True," I said, "but the present is made of what a man keeps." "Correction," he said, tapping the table near my shifted plate. "Of what a man is allowed to keep." The lights hummed. Somewhere, a pipe sighed. The rosemary burned stronger, the pan had gone too long in the heat. My daughter rose, switched off the oven, returned with water. She tried for neutral. "We just need space, Dad." "From me," I said. Her gaze slid away. "From conflict." I lifted my glass. The rim was greasy where his mouth had been earlier. We owned the same dishes, but not the same care. What conflict did I start by being here? He smiled again, patient as a schoolteacher. "You didn't start it. You prolong it." He nudged the salt away from me, closer to him. "We've sorted out a system, and your habits scratched the varnish." My breath steadied. "The table has endured worse." "Tables can be refinished," he said. "People can't." He ate. He talked with his mouth half full, performing casual power the way some men perform charity. "We'll keep your room tidy. Don't spread. Keep to your corner. Don't leave papers out." His eyes flicked to the counter where my ledger Saturday, "Don't leave, memories." I felt the change then, the click inside the chest that happens when a lock you didn't know existed finds its key. It wasn't outrage. It was inventory. I catalogued every theft, the shifted plate, the moved salt, the demoted head of table, the kitchen timer he set like a bell that marked when I could speak. My daughter, softer, "We just need order." "Order," I repeated, low. He set his fork down with a chime. "One more thing." He wiped his mouth. "When guests come, stay in your room. You make conversation heavy. My daughter's eyes flickered, a tremor, barely there, the first fault line sketched across her composure. It closed as quickly as it opened. "It's for Harmony," she said, voice small. "Harmony," he echoed, pleased. "Exactly." I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table, the one my wife had teased me about. "Your throne," she'd laughed, "sitting in my lap there the day we burned the mortgage." The memory rose like warmth and then retreated, careful not to burn me now. I took out the receipt beneath the table, pressed it in my fist until the ink bled onto my fingers, thin black veins that made their way into my lifeline. He watched me, smug and unhurried. "Understand?" "I do," I said. He leaned closer. "Then act like it." I stood. My plate barely touched. "I will." He grinned. "Good." My daughter whispered, "Dad," not a plea, more a reflex. It died in the same breath it was born. The hallway felt longer than I remembered. Each photograph of my daughter's childhood, her first bicycle, the missing front teeth, had been moved half an inch lower, as though the past itself had been scaled down to fit the new ceiling of this house. In my room, I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. The rain softened. The house stopped breathing for a moment, as if listening. I set the receipt on the dresser and looked at my hand. The ink smear turned my fingerprints into smoke. I went to the closet and pulled the old suitcase from the back, the one with the scuffed corners from a road trip my wife and I took before our daughter was born. Dust lifted in a quiet bloom. I brushed it away with the side of my hand, leaving 5 faint streaks like a tally. I opened drawers. Not many things, some shirts, a sweater my wife had knit and I had worn only twice each winter because I feared wearing it out. A shaving kit, a Bible with a dark coffee ring on the cover from a long-ago morning when faith had felt heavier than steam. I took only what a traveler takes, enough to be clean, not enough to be noticed missing right away. From the bottom drawer, I lifted the folder with the brass clasp and laid it on the bed. I added the ledger, the envelopes, the rent receipt, the utility pages with their impatient circles. I placed the photograph of my wife, just for a second, on top of the stack, then slid it underneath, like a foundation no one else can see. The house creaked. Footsteps came down the hallway, his stride, not hers. They paused outside my door, waited, then moved on. I listened until the hallway surrendered him to the living room. I sat on the edge of the bed and let my hand rest on the folder. The brass was cool. Memory knocked but I did not open the door. I packed the suitcase half full and stopped. Leaving isn't only about distance. It's about angle. You can leave from a place and still be inside its walls, if fear carries you. I wanted a different exit, one that would not diminish me. In the bathroom, I washed the ink from my fingers. It didn't want to go. It trailed the lines of my palm and clung to the ridges. I watched it pool and spin at the drain, a little universe of black water unwilling to accept the hole it was born for. When it finally slid away, it left a faint ghost behind. Good. Some marks should remain. Back in the bedroom, I zipped the suitcase halfway. The sound was small, surgical. I set it upright by the door. I didn't hide it. I left it where a man leaves a truth he wants noticed by the guilty and ignored by the brave. Through the window, the neighbor across the street, Mr. Cole, pulled his trash bin to the curb and glanced at our house with the shy curiosity of a man who's heard something through thin walls. He met my eyes for a second, lifted 2 fingers in a greeting too brief to be real, then went back to his bin. The world already knew more than it should. It would know the rest soon. I returned to the table for a glass of water. He had spread out his phone and a notepad like a coach planning substitutions. He didn't look up. "You done making statements?" he asked. "Nearly," I said. "Good," he said. "Tomorrow's full. We've got people coming." "Guests," I said. "Friends," he corrected. "They like tidy rooms." My daughter stood with a dish towel. Her jaw flexed once. She opened her mouth, then closed it around the silence. She placed a single fork on the counter with care, as if one utensil could hold a household together. I walked back to the hallway. At the threshold of my room, I paused. I knew then that I wouldn't argue again. I wouldn't plead for the head of a table that had already been lowered to fit a smaller idea of family. I wouldn't negotiate my existence like a price at a yard sale. They wanted me reduced to a shape that fit their furniture. Reduction is a craft I don't practice. I took the receipt from the dresser and slid it into the folder's front pocket where a man keeps the first page of a story he intends to finish. I buttoned my coat. I put on my shoes. I laid my keys on the nightstand and took only the spare, the one that opens without announcing its turn. I stood in the doorway and looked once at the bed, at the suitcase, at the photograph tilted just slightly toward the window. My wife's laugh seemed to move in the glass, the way sunlight can look like laughter if you catch it fast enough. I turned out the light. Killer line, would not beg for my name in the house I named. The suitcase waited by the door, zipped to the hinge, my silence packed tight, and somewhere beyond the rain, a plan unfolded like a map only I could read. The house was quiet when I returned that afternoon, but it wasn't the peace of home, it was the silence of ambush. My son-in-law sat at the dining table with a man in a gray suit, a leather briefcase propped open like a trap already sprung. My daughter hovered by the doorway, arms crossed, face pale. The gray-suited man stood as I entered. "Mr. Carter? I'm here regarding your property title. We'll just need a few quick signatures." I froze. My name on his lips felt foreign, like I was a client in my own living room. My son-in-law slid a folder across the table, the same folder that had haunted me for weeks. Its edges were sharp, its weight heavy. "This will make things easier," he said smoothly. "We'll handle everything. You just sign." I didn't sit. "What is this?" "A deed adjustment," the man in gray replied. "Just routine." Routine. That word carried poison. I opened the folder. Inside, pages thick with legal jargon and stamped blanks. At the bottom of one page, my name was already typed in bold, ready for a signature I had never agreed to. My chest tightened. They weren't just after my respect, they were after my house. I pressed my hand on the folder, pinning it to the table. "Who sent you?" The lawyer adjusted his tie. "Mr. Carter, these documents are standard." Your son-in-law explained the arrangement. My daughter flinched at that, her eyes flickering to me, then away. A crack in her loyalty, faint but visible. I leaned closer, my voice low, controlled. "I never asked for an arrangement." He shifted uncomfortably, but my son-in-law cut in, his smile thin. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just sign, and everyone wins." The word stabbed deeper than any insult. Everyone, except me. I shoved the folder back across the table. "If you think paper will erase me, you've mistaken ink for blood." The lawyer blinked, unsettled by my tone. My son-in-law's jaw tightened. My daughter whispered, "Dad, please," but even she didn't sound convinced anymore. I walked out before they could trap me further, the weight of betrayal pressing harder than the folder in my hand. But outside, the humiliation was already waiting. At the bank the next day, I went to withdraw some cash. As I slid the check across the counter, the teller hesitated, eyes darting nervously. "Sir, this account has been flagged." "Flagged?" I asked, my stomach sinking. She leaned closer, voice low. "There's been an attempt to add new signatories. Someone tried to authorize withdrawals in your name." The words hit like a hammer. Proof. I didn't need imagination anymore, I had evidence. My son-in-law wasn't just insulting me, he was trying to steal from me. The teller's gaze softened with pity. "I thought you should know." I nodded, jaw tight. You did right. As I walked out, I felt the stares again. Two men in line behind me whispered, their voices carrying. Heard his kids are trying to take his house. Imagine, betraying your own father like that. The bank lobby was suddenly heavier than the house itself. My shame was no longer private, it had witnesses, gossipers, amplifiers. But now, I had something more dangerous than shame. I had proof. That evening, I returned to my small rented room. The folder still lay on the table, its pages unsigned. I took out the teller's note, placed it inside the folder, and pressed the cover shut with both hands. The sound of the snap was final, like a coffin closing. They thought I would sign away my life quietly. Instead, I now held the weapon that would destroy them. The next time that folder opened, it wouldn't be under their roof, it would be in a courtroom, with the whole town watching. By sunrise, the room was a map and I was the weather. The motel's thin curtains bled pale light across the bedspread, turning every paper into coastline, receipts, utility printouts, the deed photocopy, my ledger with its square, stubborn handwriting. I moved cups and saucers like mountains to pin the pages from the fan the window unit kept blowing. The folder sat open at the center like a dark lake, its brass mouth ready to swallow what I fed it. Outside, a truck downshifted and groaned past. Inside, I breathed, slow, exacting, the way a surgeon does before the first cut. I clicked the cheap pen once, then again. The ink dot on its tip swelled like a storm cell. I drew a neat line under payments and wrote today's date. No more, I said to the empty room. The word didn't echo. It landed and stayed. Phone first. I dialed the bank. A menu of unmoving voices tried to herd me. I elbowed through them with repetitions of representative. When a human voice finally arrived, I used the tone men mistake for weakness, a low kindness sharpened by years of paying things on time. Mr. Carter, how may I help? My account has authorized payments, I said. Please cancel the mortgage autopay. Effective immediately. A pause, then clacks of keys. We can suspend future drafts, she said. Do you want to stop all outgoing transfers as well? All, I said. And restore the original signatory settings. Me only. Another pause. There were attempts to add names last week. I know, I said. Lock it down. Done. Her voice softened. For the record, I'm sorry, sir. Don't be, I said. They will be. I ended the call, printed the confirmation email in the motel's lobby, slid it into the folder under financial controls. The brass clasp nicked my thumb when I pressed it shut. A pin bead of blood surfaced, perfect and bright, then spread. I wiped it on the margin of the rent receipt. The red brushed into the black ink lines and turned a dark bruise purple. Good. Let the paper kiss my blood for once. Insurance next. I phoned the auto carrier and the home policy. Remove all additional drivers, I said. And suspend the secondary vehicle coverage. Anything else? The agent asked. Yes, I said. Stop bundling discounts on accounts that don't belong to them. Send the surcharge to me. I prefer paying in my name to discounts in theirs. I called the credit card company to remove every authorized user, one by one. Each name slid off like a barnacle popping from keel wood. The agent asked if I wanted new cards issued. No, I said. I want the old ones to be a reminder. Same number. New rules. Between calls I noted each step in the ledger, writing clean and slow. The cheap pen left a wet shine that caught the window light, then dried to the matte certainty of a boundary. I placed the ledger beneath the receipt so the raised ink ridges pressed their texture into that thin slip of paper like the start of a watermark. On the motel desk, the coffee tasted like burned history. I drank it anyway and dialed utilities. Rebill responsibilities to the account holder of record, I said. No more, cash upon receipt from me. Mail their demands to their names. The woman on the line cleared her throat. We'll need written authorization. You'll have it by noon, I said. Fax. I typed the letter in 14 lines. No adjectives, no tremble. Just request, account numbers, my signature the way a man writes after 30 years of paying for things he can point to with both hands. I faxed it from the front desk where the clerk in a college hoodie glanced at the page and then at me with a recognition you only get from kids who have seen their grandparents disrespected and took notes. Back upstairs, the room felt lighter by a weight an app could never measure. I laid the phone flat and listened to its small, contained heartbeat in the hiss of the AC. Outside, the world kept driving. Inside, I placed my palm on the folder and felt the calm I reserve for storms at sea. You don't argue with wind. You trim the sail. There was one call I didn't want to make but needed to. The car finance company. My son-in-law had flashed that car around town like a title to the future. The payments had left my account like obedient soldiers for 2 years. Suspend the auto draft, I said. Reassign billing to the primary driver. Are you sure? The agent asked. Absolutely. There will be late fees, she warned. I can afford their consequences, I said. I added the confirmation to payments and dotted the I in suspend with the pressure of a gavel. A small streak of ink dragged off the dot like a comet tail. I left it. Stars have tails when they move fast enough. The phone vibrated across the wood, the first tremor from their side. A voicemail came in without a ring, another followed, then another. I didn't listen. Not yet. The motel clock clicked on to a new minute. I called the grocery card service and killed the monthly transfer I had set up after my wife died, the one that was supposed to bridge grief into routine. Deactivate, I said. Close the loop. The clerk asked for a reason. I gave him one word. Clarity. I looked at the ledger and wrote it there too, just to see it once on paper belonging to me. Reason, clarity. The word steadied like a table foot under a wobble. By 10, the financial arteries they fed on were tied. By 11, I had emails, case numbers, recorded acknowledgments, a trail that would survive even if they torched the house. I placed each sheet in a plastic sleeve, not out of fear, but out of ceremony. Protection inspires respect. If I treated my proof like treasure, others would too. A soft knock at my door, housekeeping. I asked her to come back later. She nodded, glanced at the table map of my private war, and left without comment. Some people understand a battlefield even when the uniforms are paper. I dialed one more number, the credit bureau. Place a fraud alert on my reports, I said. All 3 bureaus. No new lines without my voice on the wire. Yes, sir. Reason? Family, I said, then added, and the way desperation learns to forge. I set the phone down and let the quiet climb. The receipt lay beneath my palm, thin, ordinary, still warm from the room. I folded it along a new crease, then another, making a tight square. The paper went from flimsy to dense, from float to weight. I pressed it between the ledger pages like a leaf a child saves from the last good summer. When I slid my fingers away, a faint black print smudged my skin. The ink had not fully dried. Neither had I. I thought of my daughter then, not as she was now, but as the girl who used to hand me the car keys with both hands and say, "Drive safe, Daddy," like she could bless the road with a sentence. Yesterday, when he barked for the keys, I had watched her flinch, a small, merciful earthquake beneath a city of bad decisions. That tremor told me a better story than any apology could. Cement cracks from the inside first. The phone lit again. I turned it face down. Not yet. Let them feel the shape of the hole before I throw a rope. At noon I walked to the motel office and asked to borrow their stapler. The clerk slid it across. I stapled the confirmations to the back of the original demands and then stapled the rent receipt to the front of the stack, scar tissue visible, not hidden. When I returned the stapler, the clerk nodded once, the way men nod when they witness the moment a spine decides to stand. Back in my room, I closed the folder and ran my thumb along the brass. The latch clicked. It was the cleanest sound I had heard in months. I tucked the folder into my bag, zipped it halfway, then stopped. Evidence should breathe. I set it back on the table, open like a law book, in case I wanted to reread my own courage. By late afternoon, clouds stacked like heavy plates over the highway. A gust shoved the thin window and the map of papers trembled but held. I closed my eyes and imagined their house at this hour, mail truck braking, email pings chiming, cards declined, a dashboard blooming warning lights. I pictured my son-in-law's smirk moving like wet paint on a wall that wouldn't hold it. I pictured my daughter checking the door twice and then once again, because guilt tampers with locks. My phone buzzed, then rang. I let it ring out. Another call. Then a text, mortgage bounced. Call me now. Another, insurance cancelled? Are you serious? Another, Dad, please. I read none of the audio, I needed their words dry, not wet. I stood, stretched the ache from my shoulders, and faced the mirror above the dresser. An old man looked back, older today than yesterday, but behind the eyes was a man I recognized. The one who held the ladder for my wife when she painted the kitchen the year before she left. The one who taught a child to ride on the gravel road and jogged behind her until her fear became wind. I lifted the receipt square from the ledger pocket and pressed it between my fingers, feeling its compacted truth. Then I slipped it into my shirt pocket where a heart beats. You came to humiliate, I said to it. You stayed to testify. Killer line, the day I stopped paying their bills, I started paying myself respect. I sat by the window and watched the late light thin to a wire. Cars hissed past on wet pavement, each with its own destination, none of them mine. My phone began a chorus, voicemails stacking, messages layering, numbers I knew and numbers I did not. I let the chorus sing without me. Silence is a language, I was fluent again. By nightfall, their calls would turn from anger to fear, and when the knock finally came on my motel door, I would answer like a man who writes the rules he lives by. Tell me, what would you do in this situation? I'd love to know. By Wednesday, my phone showed 12 missed calls. By Friday, 22. I sat in the stillness of the motel room, the cheap clock ticking like a metronome while their voices arrived only through recordings. One after another, voicemails stacked up, rage pressed into wires, shame funneled into static. I listened to each, then pressed delete. Not to forget, but to file them in memory. The folder on the desk already held their receipts, my mind would hold their voices. The first calls were sharp. My son-in-law's voice crackled with fury. You canceled the mortgage? Are you insane? You left us stranded, old man. Fix this. Then came my daughter's, quieter but no less piercing. Dad, the bank says the payment bounced. Please, just call them back. Her words trembled at the edges, as though she already knew the answer. By Thursday, the tone changed. His anger turned into snarls. You think you're clever? You think you can play games with me? I'll go to the police. Elder abuse. Fraud. You'll regret this. I leaned back on the motel chair, the thin wood creaking. Elder abuse? I nearly laughed. A man doesn't abuse himself by pulling back his own money. Threats sound hollow when they echo. But it was my daughter's messages that cut deeper. Dad, I don't know what's happening. He's so angry. Please, just, help us fix this. I heard her voice crack on, help, like porcelain breaking in her throat. I picked up the folded receipt from the table, smoothed its wrinkles against the wood. The ink smudge from my thumb days ago still stained the corner, a black bruise on white. I pressed it flat, then crumpled it into my palm until the paper screamed, then smoothed it again. Scars don't vanish when you flatten them. They only deepen. By Friday evening, the desperation had multiplied. Another voicemail, this one frantic. "Dad, the insurance lapsed. They towed the car. Please, please, just tell me what to do." Her voice broke completely on the last word. For a moment, I closed my eyes. I could see her, not as she was now, standing beside him like a shadow, but as the girl who once brought me her broken toys and whispered, "Fix it, Daddy." And I always had. But now, she had placed her broken trust into the wrong hands, and I couldn't fix that. At the diner that night, I sipped coffee under buzzing fluorescent lights while the waitress topped off my cup. She glanced at the papers sticking from my folder, her eyes catching on the stamped confirmations, the ledger notes. She didn't ask, but she smiled knowingly, the way people do when they sense a man carrying truth heavier than silence. Two men at the counter spoke low, but the words reached me anyway. "Heard his kids are drowning. Mortgage unpaid, car gone. Serves them right. You can't bite the hand that built your house." I stirred my coffee slowly. I didn't add sugar. The bitterness suited me. Back at the motel, the calls didn't stop. Midnight brought a pounding voicemail. "You're killing us, you stubborn old fool. Do you hear me? You're nothing without us. Nothing." I let the words hang in the dim room, then deleted the message. Killer line, nothing without us. Strange, coming from the mouths of those who lived off everything I had provided. But the next message, that was different. "Dad," my daughter whispered, voice hoarse, "I didn't know about the loan. He said it was just paperwork. I swear I didn't know." Silence followed, long and raw, before the beep cut her off. I replayed it twice. The first crack. Her loyalty had begun to splinter. Doubt, faint but there. The first truth she had admitted out loud, that she was in the dark. I rose and walked to the window. The neon motel sign flickered red across the glass. I caught my reflection there, lined face, tired eyes, but behind it, shadows pooled on the pavement. A figure stood too long under the buzzing light, then another joined. Their shapes shifted but didn't move closer. I let the curtain fall. Then I reached for the folder, slid the newest printouts inside, the car repossession notice, the bounced mortgage confirmation, the faxed insurance suspension. Each page layered like stone on a grave. On top, I laid the rent receipt again, folded tight into a square. "Nothing without us," he had said. I looked at the folder, heavy now, solid in my hands. "No," I whispered. "Nothing without me." The phone buzzed again on the nightstand. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to. The storm outside was already proof enough. A knock echoed through the motel hallway, sharp and deliberate. Shadows shifted under my door, blotting the light. The knock on the motel door came like a gavel strike. I stayed still, my hand resting on the folder spread open on the table. Through the thin wood, I heard his voice, sharp, venomous. "Open up, old man. Enough hiding." The shadows under the door shifted. My daughter's whisper followed, fragile. "Dad, please." I opened the door slowly. He barged in first, dragging the damp night air with him. My daughter trailed behind, her arms wrapped around herself as if she wanted to disappear inside her own skin. The motel's yellow bulb painted her face in tired streaks. The room felt smaller instantly, my sanctuary now invaded by the very chains I had cut loose. He scanned the table, eyes narrowing at the spread of papers. "So this is where you've been? Plotting?" I didn't answer. Instead, I tapped the folder. The brass clasp clicked open like the lid of a coffin. I pulled the rent receipt free and laid it flat on the table between us. These, I said evenly, were my chains. He sneered. So what? You paid your way. That's how the world works. I set another paper down, the bank's confirmation of account tampering. Then the insurance cancellation. Then the repossession notice. Each page made a sharp sound against the wood, like nails in a coffin. My daughter's eyes darted over the pages, her lips parting as the picture formed. She shook her head slightly, whispering, You told me it was just bills. He snapped at her, Don't start. But her voice cracked louder. You said it was nothing, Mark. That Dad agreed. I slid one final sheet across the table. The teller's written note, the one that confirmed the attempt to forge my authorization. My proof. This, I said, is theft. The air went still. Even the Motel AC seemed to pause its hum. My daughter's face drained of color. Is that true? She asked him, voice trembling. He tried to smirk, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. They make mistakes. Clerical errors. You don't know how banks work. Don't I? I asked. I pushed the ledger toward him, open to the page where I had written every demand, every date, every insult. I've kept records longer than you've been alive. The difference is, my records tell the truth. He slammed his palm on the table, rattling the papers. You think anyone cares about your little notes? You think anyone believes an old man over me? A voice cleared in the hallway. The motel clerk, drawn by the noise, stood just inside the doorframe. Behind him, 2 other guests lingered, curious. The public had arrived, right on schedule. The clerk glanced at the spread of documents, then at me. Everything okay here, sir? Perfect, I said calmly. Witnesses are always welcome. My son-in-law barked, Get out. But the clerk didn't move. Neither did the onlookers. Their silence weighed heavier than shouts. Public fallout had begun. I lifted the receipt once more, held it between my fingers. You demanded I pay rent in my own house. You turned family into transaction. But this, I let the paper drift down onto the forged bank record, this is where the transaction ends and the crime begins. My daughter backed away from him, shaking her head, tears streaking. Mark, you lied. You lied to me. He reached for her arm, but she pulled free, standing closer to me now than to him. The shift was small, but it was seismic. You've ruined us, he spat at me. Do you hear? You've ruined everything. No, I said, my voice steady as stone. I stopped letting you ruin me. Killer line, these papers you mocked are the same papers that will bury you. The clerk stepped further inside. Sir, should I call the police? My son-in-law's face twisted. He looked at the open folder, the eyes watching, the daughter no longer shielding him. For the first time, he looked cornered, not victorious. He slammed the table once more, scattering the receipts, then stormed out, cursing. My daughter remained, shaking. She glanced at me, guilt heavy in her voice. Dad. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know. I gathered the papers slowly, refolding the receipt into its square, tucking it back into the folder's front pocket. My hands didn't shake this time. Now you do, I said. Outside, I could hear him shouting in the parking lot, his voice cracking against the night. The clerk closed the door gently behind him, sealing the witness's silence into the room. I looked at my daughter. She wiped her eyes, her breath uneven. For the first time in months, she didn't look like his shadow. She looked like a woman standing at the edge of regret, staring down at what it had cost her. Go home, I told her softly. See what's left when his anger runs out. She hesitated, then nodded, stepping into the hallway's dim light. I sat back down, the folder heavy but righteous in front of me. The tide had shifted. The next time these papers left this folder, it wouldn't be in a motel room, it would be in a courtroom, under oath, with the whole town watching. Stay with me, because what happens next will shock you even more. The next morning, the courthouse clock tower struck 9. I was already waiting on the steps. The folder pressed against my ribs inside the coat pocket, heavy as a second heart. Every document I had gathered, the receipts, the ledger, the forged bank note, was in order, lined like soldiers. The brass clasp had left a faint dent on my chest from the walk. Good. Proof should leave a mark. Inside, the air smelled of wood polish and paper dust. My lawyer, Mr. Daniels, met me in the hallway. He was younger than me by decades, but his eyes carried the practiced calm of a man who had seen families tear themselves apart over wills, deeds, and inheritance. "You're ready?" he asked. I tapped the folder. "I've been ready since the day they handed me this receipt." We sat in his office, oak shelves sagging under law books, blinds slicing the light into bars across the desk. I slid the folder forward, opening it slowly, page by page. He examined each with sharp attention. The forged application. The teller's written note. The bounced mortgage confirmation. The repossession notice. The ledger, neat and relentless. And finally, the rent receipt that had started it all. Daniels leaned back, exhaling. "This isn't just elder exploitation. This is fraud, attempted theft, and possible forgery. We can file for a restraining order, and we can initiate eviction proceedings. The house is yours alone on the deed, correct?" I nodded. "Paid off 20 years ago. Their names aren't on it." He tapped the receipt with his pen. "Then this, ironically, is their biggest mistake. This shows intent. You didn't volunteer. They demanded." I watched the ink shimmer under the light, the paper more alive than their voices had ever been. "I want them out," I said. "Out of my house. Out of my accounts. Out of my name." Daniels nodded. "Then we'll give them 30 days. Legally, of course. But with this evidence, I doubt they'll last half that." He drafted the paperwork, the printer whirring out forms that smelled faintly of heat. I signed each page carefully, my pen steady. Each signature was a reclamation. By the time I pressed the last line, my hand felt lighter than it had in months. Daniels slid the stack into a new envelope, crisp and white. "I'll file these today. The sheriff will serve them papers by next week. And if they contest," he smiled thinly, "we'll let the court see your folder. Killer line, they tried to trap you with paper. You'll free yourself with it." I left his office walking taller. Outside, the autumn air cut clean, and people on the courthouse steps nodded as I passed. Word had already traveled. It always did in a town like ours. Some looked away out of shame, others watched with quiet respect. Either way, the narrative had shifted. I was no longer the man paying rent in his own house. I was the man fighting back. That evening, I returned to the motel. The voicemail count blinked red, 28. I played the latest. "You've destroyed us," he roared. "You can't do this. That house is ours too. You'll regret crossing me." Then another, softer. "My daughter. Dad. I don't know what to say. He's furious. I can't stop him. But I believe you. I saw the papers. I know now." Her breath caught. "Please don't shut me out completely." I sat on the bed, folder in my lap. The receipt rested on top, folded square. I ran my thumb over the creases. Once it had humiliated me. Now it was my shield. The knock came just past 9. A heavy hand, official. I opened the door to find Sheriff Miller, broad-shouldered, his hat low against the rain. He held a manila envelope. "Evening, Mr. Carter," he said. "I've got the filings here. Restraining orders in effect. Eviction papers will be served tomorrow." He paused, lowering his voice. "Between us, I've heard the talk. Folks around here know what's happening. They're watching." I nodded. "Let them watch." He tipped his hat. "You've done right, sir. Now let the law do the rest." When he left, I closed the door and laid the sheriff's envelope atop my folder. 2 weights, 1 destiny. I turned on the lamp, its yellow glow pooling across the papers. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a small, tired smile. The war had shifted fronts. No longer in the shadows of gossip, no longer in whispered demands across the dinner table. Now, it would be fought where truth leaves scars that can't be denied, courtrooms and records that outlive liars. I whispered into the quiet room, not to my daughter, not to my enemies, but to the house itself. "Tomorrow, this house breathes again." The folder sat closed on the desk, the sheriff's envelope resting on top like a seal. Together, they looked less like burdens and more like a judgment waiting to fall. By the end of the week, their fortress began to crack, not from my hands, but from the weight of their own lies. News travels faster than wind in a small town. At the diner that Saturday morning, voices carried over the hiss of the griddle. "They lost the car. Creditors are circling." Imagine, after all that talk of success. I sat at my booth, coffee steaming, the folder by my elbow like a silent companion. The waitress poured a refill, glanced at the papers sticking from its edge, and gave me the kind of nod that said, "We know. And we're on your side." Across the street, a tow truck idled in front of my house. My son-in-law stood on the porch, red-faced, arguing with the driver. My daughter tugged at his arm, pleading under her breath, but the driver only shook his head and hooked the wheels of the SUV. The neighbors had gathered, arms folded, whispers rising like smoke. One child pointed, laughing, until his mother hushed him. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness grounding me. That car had been their pride, the shine, the monthly payments siphoned from my account without thanks. Now it rolled away, chained to a truck, dignity clanking with every turn of the winch. Inside the diner, the talk grew sharper. Credit card companies are after them, too. His wife looked pale at the pharmacy yesterday. Guess the old man wasn't the problem after all. Each word was a verdict. Not from me, but from the town. Later that afternoon, I walked past the hardware store where my daughter once worked part-time as a teenager. The clerk, old friend of mine, leaned against the counter. "Heard she had to leave work early," he said quietly. "Couldn't stand the stairs. Folks know now. Papers don't lie." I nodded. "No, they don't." That evening, I sat at the motel desk, ledger open, receipt stacked, when my phone lit up again. This time, I answered. "Dad," my daughter's voice cracked. "They're calling non-stop. The bank, the credit cards. He lost his job, too. They found out about the loan. They said he forged signatures." I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the static. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear, I didn't. Please, just tell me what to do." My fingers brushed the folded receipt tucked in the folder's pocket. Its creases had grown soft with handling, edges worn. It had started as humiliation, but now it was scripture, a record of everything I had endured. "You start," I said slowly, "by seeing the truth. Not mine. Yours." A long pause. Then a sob. "I don't know if I can." "You can," I replied. "Because when lies collapse, the only thing left standing is what's real." She didn't answer. Just breathing, shaky, then the line went dead. The next day at church, whispers spread even before the hymns began. My daughter and her husband slipped in late, heads bowed. People turned. Some with pity, most with quiet disdain. I sat apart, the folder resting on my lap like scripture. When the pastor asked for prayers, someone muttered, "Pray for those who dishonor their fathers." A few heads nodded. My son-in-law's ears burned red. After service, I stood outside beneath the bell tower. A neighbor approached me, shaking my hand firmly. "You've held your ground. Good. Men like you keep this town steady." Others followed, pats on the shoulder, nods of respect. My children's collapse had become my quiet restoration. But not all respect came soft. That afternoon, at the diner, the door slammed open. My son-in-law stormed in, eyes bloodshot, shirt untucked, desperation rolling off him like heat. He marched straight to my booth, fists trembling. "You think this is over?" he snarled. "You ruined me." I set down my coffee carefully, meeting his glare. The diner fell silent, forks paused midair, conversations froze. The entire town became witness. "You ruined yourself," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He leaned closer, spit flecking his lips. "I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you regret this day." The waitress shifted uneasily, but I raised a hand. "Calm. Steady." I reached into the folder, pulled the receipt, and laid it on the table between us. The ink had faded slightly, but its meaning had only sharpened. "This," I said, "was the day you destroyed yourself. Every collapse since then is just the echo." His face contorted, rage wrestling with fear. He looked around the room, realizing every eye was on him, every whisper already loaded like bullets. He slammed the table once, hard, then stormed out into the night. The receipt lay untouched on the wood. I folded it again, slower this time, and slid it back into the folder. Around me, the diner breathed back to life, forks clinking, voices rising. But their glances lingered, respectful, affirming. Killer line, "Respect isn't stolen, it is surrendered." His threat still echoed as the door swung shut, "I'll destroy you." Then I met his eyes. "The only regret I carry," I said, "is ever letting you through my door." Killer line, "You demanded rent for my room, now you owe rent to the truth." The pastor cleared his throat, addressing the crowd. "What's done in shadows has come into the light. Let us stand with what is right." Murmurs of agreement spread. Hands shook mine. Neighbors patted my back. Their respect wasn't loud, it was steady, like stone underfoot. My daughter slipped free from his grip and stumbled toward the edge of the crowd, her face streaked with tears. She didn't look at me directly, but she didn't return to him either. That, in itself, was a choice. He stood alone now, his face red, his breath ragged. The stares weighed heavier than chains. He cursed under his breath, then pushed through the crowd, storming off the church lawn. The whispers followed him down the street like a funeral procession. I stayed until the last hand had shaken mine, until the murmurs softened into respect. Then I walked home, not to their house, but to the place that would soon be mine again. The folder was still warm in my grip, the receipt folded neat inside. That night, under the lamplight of the motel room, I opened the folder once more. The receipt lay atop the eviction papers, a crown resting on a sword. Tomorrow, the law would cut as sharply as the truth had today. Monday dawned cold, sharp, and merciless, the kind of morning that strips illusions bare. I dressed carefully, not in my work-worn flannel but in the suit I hadn't worn since my wife's funeral. The tie felt stiff at my throat, but dignity sometimes comes with weight. I slipped the folder into my briefcase, the rent receipt resting at the very front, as if eager to testify. Today, it would. At the lawyer's office, Daniels was already waiting, a stack of documents spread like weapons across his desk. He gestured to the chair. "It's time." We went over everything once more. The forged loan application, the teller's note, the repossession papers. And then, at the top, the receipt, humiliation turned into Exhibit A. Daniel smiled thinly. Poetic. They demanded rent from you, now they'll pay rent to the law. By noon, we were at the courthouse. The clerk filed the eviction order and restraining request, stamping each page with a sound that felt like justice hammering nails into a coffin. The sheriff would deliver the papers by the week's end. But Daniel's wasn't finished. He held up a thin packet of stapled pages. I also spoke with the local paper. They've been following Whispers. With your permission, they'll run the story, fraud, forgery, and the receipt that started it all. Public record. I hesitated, thinking of my daughter. Shame cuts deeper when the town reads it over breakfast. But then I remembered the whispers at the market, the stares at the bank, the gossip that had humiliated me long before the truth came out. If shame had been their weapon, exposure would be mine. Do it, I said. That night, the paper hit the stands. The headline stretched across the front page, Man accused of defrauding father, rent receipt sparks legal battle. The photo showed my house, the one I built, the one they tried to steal. My neighbors read it at the diner, at the barbershop, in the pews of the church basement. By midday, everyone knew. At the grocery store, two men leaned over the paper. Imagine stealing from your own father. Not just stealing, charging him rent. I'll never look at them the same. I walked past, silent, the briefcase in hand. For the first time, the whispers didn't burn. They bowed. By afternoon, creditors had already called my son-in-law's employer. His job, already fragile, collapsed completely. He came home to find neighbors watching, their eyes sharp with judgment. When the reporter's camera caught him shouting on the porch, red-faced, the image spread faster than wildfire. My daughter called that evening, her voice raw. Dad, it's everywhere. Everyone knows. He's falling apart. And you? I asked. She didn't answer at first. Then, softly, I don't know where to stand anymore. You stand, I said, where truth doesn't collapse. In the motel, I laid the newspaper on the desk beside the receipt. The black ink of the headline mirrored the black ink of that first demand. Once, it had been a noose. Now, it was a banner. The sheriff called late that night. Mr. Carter, I'll be serving him papers tomorrow. Public. Let the whole block see. His voice carried a satisfaction that matched my own. I thanked him, then closed the folder, pressing the receipt between its covers like the crown jewel of justice. The next day, the street outside my house filled with quiet spectators, neighbors pretending to rake leaves, mail carriers pausing too long at mailboxes. When the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, my son-in-law's bravado finally cracked. He shouted, cursed, tried to argue, but the officer's hand on his shoulder silenced him. Papers were handed over. 30 days. No wiggle room. The crowd watched. Whispers carried. My daughter wept quietly on the porch, caught between husband and father, between lie and truth. She looked at me once, her eyes full of sorrow, then turned away. The sheriff tipped his hat. It's done. Killer line, they tried to bury me with paper, but it was paper that dug their grave. That night, back in the motel, I opened the folder again. The receipt lay on top, and for the first time, it didn't sting. It shone. The next morning, when I entered the diner, the whole room fell silent, then rose, one by one, to shake my hand. The knock on my motel door this time was softer, not a gavel, not a threat, but the trembling rap of defeat. I opened it to find my daughter standing there, her face blotched from crying, her hands shaking. Behind her, at the edge of the parking lot, he paced like a caged animal, phone pressed to his ear, shoulders hunched. She stepped inside without waiting for permission, the way children once did when nightmares chased them from their beds. Dad, her voice cracked. Please. Don't let it end like this. I closed the door and gestured to the chair. She sank into it, twisting her wedding band until her finger reddened. He's lost everything. The job. The car. The house, everyone knows. People stare when we walk down the street. They whisper in church. He can't take it. I set the folder on the table between us. The brass clasp gleamed in the lamplight. Slowly, I opened it, revealing the pages, legal notices, bank confirmations, the sheriff's eviction order. At the very top sat the folded receipt, worn thin, the ink smudged by my own hands. This, I said, tapping the paper, is where it began. Not with me. With him. With you standing beside him. Tears welled in her eyes. I know. I see that now. I was blind, and I let him twist me against you. But, Dad, please, don't let this be the end of us. From outside, his voice broke through the thin walls. Tell him to back down. Tell him we'll make it right. His tone wasn't commanding anymore. It was pleading, frantic. I looked at my daughter, really looked. She was no longer the girl who once slipped her hand into mine during thunderstorms. She was a woman, broken by choices, heavy with guilt. You stood with him when he demanded rent from me, I said quietly. You looked away when he erased me at my own table. Now you want me to forget? I don't want you to forget, she whispered. I want you to forgive. Forgive. The word hung in the air like smoke. I unfolded the receipt, smoothed it flat on the table. My fingerprints, faintly stained into the paper, marked it as surely as blood. I lifted it, pressed it into her hand. She clutched it like a relic, her tears falling onto its creases. This isn't a debt, I said. It's a scar. And scars don't vanish, they remind. She sobbed, pressing the paper to her chest. Outside, he pounded on the door, his voice cracking. Please. Don't do this. Don't throw us out. I didn't open the door. I let his desperation echo unanswered. My daughter stood, trembling, the receipt still clutched to her heart. Dad, she whispered, what happens now? I met her eyes, steady. Now, you live with the truth. And I live free. Killer line, I won't erase the scar, but I won't carry your chains either. She nodded slowly, broken, then turned toward the door. She hesitated once, glancing back at me as if hoping for one last lifeline. But I stayed seated, hands folded over the folder. Some bridges can't be rebuilt until both sides burn down. She opened the door. He stood there, pale, trembling, hands outstretched like a beggar. Sir, he muttered, please, just give us time. But I said nothing. Silence was my verdict. She lowered her eyes and stepped past him into the night. He followed, shoulders sagging, curses drowned by the weight of defeat. The room was quiet again. The folder remained open, the sheriff's papers gleaming under the lamp. I took the receipt she had left behind, it had slipped from her hand onto the floor, and placed it back into the folder's pocket. The brass clasp clicked shut, firm and final. Tomorrow, the law would do what my silence had already begun. The courthouse was full that morning, not just of officials, but of neighbors. Small towns have long memories, and mine had come to see how the story ended. I walked in steady, the folder under my arm. The brass clasp caught the light like a badge, not a burden. The rent receipt rested on top, thin as breath but heavier than a gavel. I felt its edges press against my palm, a reminder that humiliation, when carried long enough, can turn into a weapon. The judge entered, his robe brushing the wood floor like a dark wave. Case of Carter versus tenants in residence, the clerk called. My daughter sat at the defense table, eyes swollen, hands trembling. Beside her, my son-in-law twitched like a trapped animal, whispering frantically to the court-appointed attorney. The proceedings began. My lawyer, Daniels, laid out the evidence one by one. The forged loan attempt. The bank's note. The repossession. The bounced mortgage. And at last, the receipt. He lifted it carefully, as if it were fragile glass, then placed it before the judge. This, Daniels said, his voice calm and deliberate, is where the exploitation began. A man, asked to pay rent for the very room he built with his own hands. This slip of paper is not only evidence of greed, it is the seed of fraud. The courtroom shifted. Murmurs rippled, gasps rose, and I caught the eyes of neighbors who once whispered behind my back. Their faces now burned with shame, not for me, but for the lies they had half believed. My son-in-law jumped up, his voice cracking. It's not what it looks like. He agreed, he wanted to contribute. The judge's gavel struck once. Sit down. My daughter's tears broke loose. She covered her face, shoulders shaking. For the first time, she looked not like his wife but like my child again, lost and ashamed. The judge reviewed the papers, flipping through each page with deliberate patience. At last, he looked over his glasses at the defense. Forgery. Fraud. Attempted theft. The evidence is overwhelming. The property deed remains solely with Mr. Carter. The eviction order stands. 30 days. The gavel struck again, final as thunder. A collective exhale swept through the room. The neighbors rose, some nodding, some clapping softly despite the setting. Respect, once stripped from me, returned in waves. The whispers that had haunted me for months were replaced with a different sound, approval. My son-in-law slumped in his chair, pale and beaten. My daughter wiped her eyes, unable to meet my gaze. As the bailiff escorted them out, the courtroom doors creaked, and sunlight spilled across the floor. I remained seated, the folder still open before me. Slowly, I lifted the receipt one final time. The paper trembled in my hand, but not from fear, only from the weight of memory. I folded it carefully, tucking it into the folder's back pocket. It had begun as my humiliation, then became my proof. Now, it was my closure. Outside, the townspeople gathered. Mrs. Grant pressed my hand firmly. Mr. Cole clapped my shoulder. Even the sheriff tipped his hat with a smile. Justice done, Mr. Carter. Justice done. I walked down the courthouse steps, the autumn air sharp and clean. The briefcase was lighter now, the folder no longer a coffin of shame but a ledger of survival. For the first time in months, I walked without feeling eyes digging into my back. They didn't whisper anymore. They nodded. They respected. Back at the motel, I laid the folder on the dresser and stared at it for a long while. My wife's photograph, carried from the old house, leaned against the lamp. I imagined her smile warming the edges of the paper, imagined her voice, "You did it. You held the line." That night, I returned to the house. Empty boxes littered the porch. My daughter's car sat in the driveway, packed tight. She was leaving. She stood by the door, eyes red, clutching a suitcase. When she saw me, she whispered, "Dad. I don't expect forgiveness. But I am sorry." I nodded once. Words weren't needed. She kissed my cheek softly, then left with her car trailing dust into the night. Inside, the house was mine again. Quiet, still, scarred, but mine. I placed the folder on the mantel, the receipt folded within, resting like a crown atop a kingdom reclaimed. Killer line, family isn't those who demand rent, it's those who honor sacrifice. I sat in my old armchair, the one he had once claimed, and let the silence settle around me. Not a prison anymore. A home. The receipt remained locked in the folder, not as a chain, not as a weapon, but as a scar, sealed shut, proof that dignity, once reclaimed, never fades again. If you liked this story, like the video, subscribe, and share your impressions in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left.